I've been with the company for a couple of years. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, working both on the practitioner side, working with a multinational company, deploying identity systems across the world, as well as now a product manager helping build those technologies. Unbound ID, if you haven't introduced to them before, we focus on customer identity management, particularly working with brands across many industries and how they engage their customers at not only at authentication but at registration and how they manage their profiles. So we bring a wealth of experience in dealing with customer identities. And some of the challenges that we especially dive into straight away is about the data. What does an identity actually entail? The attributes, although very common at the very core, vary by perspective, meaning if you're a security professional, you have a particular definition of what an identity means to you. If you talk to marketing, they have a different definition of what a customer is or an identity. You talk to sales, you talk to support, you talk to procurement, and the list goes on. And there hasn't been one particular answer. They all want their particular view, right? And that makes a very difficult challenge for building identity and storage systems and data modeling as to what you actually do decide on what identity is. There's core practices, master data management, and others that spend a significant amount of time, resources, working with all your organizations to come up with a single definition. And oftentimes it doesn't hold, right? You've seen that in evidence of identity silos, different customer databases being developed all across your organization because it's very challenging. And I think that's some of the things that we need to discuss as an industry is determining, is our model broken today? There's not one answer, and we need to come up with a different type of solution. Attributes across those various companies are very common, right? You find a name, you find an ID, something that uniquely identifies them. You got addresses, phones, emails, and you may have multiple ones of those. You have a customer number that may be used for referencing different perspectives and different systems. You have a country, right? But there are answers that the applications are often looking for that these type of attributes don't necessarily answer. Is this a male or a female? You can't tell by the name necessarily. What phone number should I use if I want to contact them? Or if they have multiple addresses, what email addresses or multiple mailing addresses, which one should I use? What's their preferred language if they're in a country that has a multilingual type experience? I lived in Singapore. They support 4 national languages, right? And every single sign in every subway, every public transit in 4 different languages. How do I address that person, right? Part of the challenge of who owns customer data often drives this, right? So a quick poll. In your organizations, who owns customer data? IT? Anybody? Line of business? Anybody? Engineering? Software developers? Does anybody have a chief data officer? There's one. So, I've spent a lot of time looking at this problem, and that's sort of been the answer, that data is going to be treated as an asset, and that asset's going to be owned by the chief data officer. And that chief data officer is responsible for actually understanding how the data is leveraged across the organization, similar to what MDM does, but actually monetizing it, right? Understanding what information do you need and how do you drive it. But still, the questions remain, right? How do you actually model the data? And part of what the answer has been for a number of years is using a very defined schema, right? Before you go design your application, you start talking about what's the data model that it's going to back it, essentially, right? And a lot of good reasons for that. You need predictable and readable data, right? You're going to have multiple applications, a diverse set of systems that are interacting with that information, and you need to know where to find the name, where to find addresses, where to find customer information, customer IDs. You also need to be able to find, search, and relate to information, right? If you're trying to look up a customer identity and what's their order history, what have they purchased in the past, right? You need to find some way to connect the 2 dots. And you need to have a predictable system. Additional demands, I think, over the last, let's say, 10 years from marketing has been around reporting and analytics, right? And they've had a significant influence on what the identity profile entails, right? They're not only interested in activity data, but specifically about the demographic segmentation, the interests of that individual, and how that drives experiences. They're looking for a feedback loop. In the previous session, we've talked about single sign-on quite a bit, and I'm sure you've heard it over the last number of years. Consistency across apps, authentication is one experience. The data is another challenge, right? If you were here for Bjorn's presentation, one of the slides he showed is that you had 6 different places to manage your profile at a company, right? Depending on what type of customer you were and what business you do with them. That's untenable, right? But you want that consistency. And if you in this profession, we're very particular about security and data protection, right? You can't really secure and protect if you don't know the nature of the data, the sensitivity of the data, the classification of the data, right? So you have to model it before and then put the policies in place in front of it. Businesses, though, are very interested in more data, right? If you think about a lot of industries are talking about digital transformation or digital business initiatives that drives additional engagement with customers, right? And that's driven by experience. I want to have a better experience for my customers so that they do business with me more often. That experience is driven by analytics. Analytics is typically driven by data, right? If everybody's looking for data, right, where does that have to go? Right, there's activity streams that you can talk about. There's social data that's out there. There's application information. And it's all tied to an identity, right? I have to drive a particular person's experience to be different based on data. And we need it now, right? There's a significant aspect of how timeliness of geolocation, timeliness of the mobile information, what interactions are they going to drive into, and how does that fill into how we drive additional experiences? And you see a kind of an error on my slide. IoT, I don't know where that came from, but IoT is another example of that. I can tell you the number of conversations that I've had with architects about my company's planning on leveraging IoT either as a manufacturing or as a partner and be able to connect to my devices, right? Those devices generate a significant amount of data, right? I went to IoT World a few weeks ago, and they're anticipating terabytes of data per day, per device, right? Or in a household that has devices. Where's that going to go? What information from an analytics perspective are you going to derive, and where are you going to put that, and how's that going to drive experiences? Right? Your profile is going to be the center of that. Your identity profile is going to be at the center of that. As these digital business initiatives take hold and they start figuring out and defining plans and specific initiatives around architectures and information, you'll get to identity very quickly. If you start analyzing where your customers are coming from, you'll start seeing mobile, right? And I wouldn't say it's the mobile app, right? I would say it's primarily on mobile web. And statistics back that up, primarily because it's very difficult to engage a company over a mobile app for the first time. You need to discover them. How do you discover them? You search, right? You search over the web. And you may engage them over your mobile browser a few times before you actually go engage them, right? A mobile app will become more reserved for your repeat customers, people that really want to engage you on an ongoing basis. And I have a similar story where I was traveling to Portland, and I was staying with Marriott for the first time. And I get in late, and they somehow overbooked, and they send me to the funny part of it. I found out the next day why they overbooked was Rush. If any of you ever listened to Rush, they were in town playing. And apparently everybody from Seattle to San Francisco came to Portland and took up every hotel over the next 20 miles, right? So I had to drive. They took me out to town and came out. But when I came back, right, the manager greeted me and made sure I was taken care of, make sure I had a room. And he said, let me sign you up for a rewards account, and I'll give you a nice amount of rewards that covers a couple nights for the next time you stay with me, right? And guess what? I didn't have a Marriott's rewards app or anything like that, but I started engaging with them. I liked my stay. I liked my experience with them, and I started becoming a repeat customer, right? And it made sense for me to go and get my mobile app, right? So Now you take a web experience, whether it's mobile or desktop, you transition that to a mobile phone. They're not the same experience. They're different experiences, right? We're staying here at Marriott, right? This is the first time I got a chance to use their mobile key, right? And to open my door and to get to the fitness room, so on and so forth, right? How does that, all those different experiences and channels from the desk person I interact with at reception, to the mobile, to the fitness center, to my mobile device, all have to be linked. And they're all linked to that profile. There are going to be different channels that you're going to have to engage across. Your customers are going to be engaging across, right? And they have different data models. Your website is going to be different expectations than your mobile. Your mobile web is going to be different than your mobile app, right? And then if you start throwing in IoT, right? You have very small, simple devices, right? If you even take into account, let's just say in the future, your fitness, you can come up to a fitness machine and they can download your profile off your phone from their mobile app, right? As an example. And it knows the type of workout you like. If let's just say it's a treadmill, you know, and I like running in mountain trails, right? So it selects that automatically and I move forward. Where is that information going to be stored, right? All of this experiences are going to be driven through analytics, right? They want to be able to not only know about you explicitly, but implicitly, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next session if you're staying about where analytics fits into not only just knowing experiences, but privacy. And if you've paid attention to social media or social channels that people are using, it's changing, right? If you saw the last few years, the investments Facebook, Google, Apple have made in their platforms, it's been around messaging, right? Chat. $19 billion for WhatsApp. I didn't think that's worth it, but they do. They see a massive amount of change in social amount of information. That's different than having a Facebook profile. You're just talking one-to-one, and they wanted to monetize that. How does that fit in your business model? How does that fit in your channel? How are you identifying those customers? Because it's not only just talking to a large group of people, you may be talking one-to-one, right? And we talked a little bit identities, right? There's two aspects to IoT and identities. One is the experience side, which we talked a little bit about, generating a lot of data and the activities around that. But there's also a security profile, right, that it can be leveraged. How does that fit into your authentication system, right? Where does that plug into your identity profile? You have a large number of things that are coming out that will drive the definition of identity. And you're going to be under a significant amount of pressure from the business to deliver, right? You won't have 6 months to think about what your data model should look like. You won't have the number of test cycles to make sure it works the way you need to think it needs to work across all the different applications. You need to iterate quickly. And yet you need to protect the system. So kind of where do you go? The answer probably for the last 5 years has been NoSQL. There's a number of technologies that have been very attractive and developed and matured by the application development community that drive kind of the very specific use cases, right? If you're in an agile business methodology, right, you want to iterate very quickly. This is great. You know how much time people spend data modeling, right? This is how you get around that. It's like you don't define it the first day. You evolve it, right? And it's true. You do evolve the identity. I can't tell you the number of companies that currently, especially that are focused on the digital aspect of their experience, use NoSQL systems as their core IAM infrastructure in terms of customers, right? And I also now have conversations about how it's not working. It is not scaling to the way they need to. There are challenges with how you protect data, how you govern it, how you structure it, and then how do I keep it maintained, right, across all the different use cases. So as all things in technology, right, there's something in the middle. We've swung from a very defined space in terms of the schema. We've gone to a place where we thought that we could just do it as we go. And there's something that needs to be in the middle, right? You'll have an increasing number of ingestion points that require data to evolve, right? There needs to be a core aspect of the identity that I think remains static and controlled and protected. there's an aspect of the identity that will need to be flexible. The data is going to be transient and evolving, right? And you need to be able to respond. The systems that have one validation of this, just if you follow application architecture design, is the concept of polyglot, right? You have a database or an architecture per service that fits that specific service. The challenge with doing that with identity is you create silos, right? And if your whole goal is to create a single experience or a consistent experience, right, you kind of have a tough decision to work with. But recognizing that systems, you as a practitioner, as a designer, as an architect, need to think about, can I find a system? Is there a system that really handles both, right? Can handle the transient nature of the data that evolves around identity, but still maintain the core aspects of how architecture is maintained. And like I said, the nut of it what you'll observe, if you can't, is that application identity silos will continue to be developed, right? You'll see new customer databases, and if you're large enough, right, you continuously will be surprised as to where another database came from. So, identity is about data, right? Identities will evolve. You need to think about how do you maintain both the structure and control that is required to do both the reporting, the security, the analytics, but then allow applications to evolve very quickly and rapidly, especially when you're talking about new social streams, IoT, and I'm pretty sure IoT is part of some of the conversations that you're doing. And with that, the solution itself needs to evolve, right? You can't have a static model. You have to think about how you incorporate that into the identity. And kind of just on a additional note, I think Bjorn mentioned this, and this is something that Unbound ID inherently believes about how customer identity is evolving, is that it won't be just about the identity itself, right? You'll have other relational identities that are associated with them. They have relationships. And if you think about households, and we talked to a number of companies about they're creating an entity in their systems, and their customer identity systems called households, and they'll have members, and those members will have devices, right? And some of those devices are shared. They may want to invite a friend into those programs. Those are all very interesting. And guess what? All those streams of information from every activity from those identities feed into analytics. Those analytics will be used, even if it's not specifically for that identity, but because you have a relationship, can drive an experience, right? They'll be easier for you to determine that you're a father, that you're a husband, that you have a child, that you like rock climbing, or that you're at CIS. Right? They'll have more and more information about you and it'll be incorporated into this. So we'll love to talk more about it. If you're interested, if you're facing similar challenges, Unbound Ideas, you have a booth upstairs. We have tracks later this afternoon that are covering some additional topics and actual use cases with various our customers. And I want to thank you for your time. Open it up for questions. Yes.
So I guess you have the permanent profile stored in the relational, and then you have the transient temporary profile stored in the NoSQL. So how do you correlate?
Well, can you repeat the question? Sure. So, gentleman, what's your name?
Vincent.
Vincent was asking that if you have your core profile stored in a relational database, and you have your transient part of your profile stored in NoSQL. How do you correlate? Well, that's part of our argument, that it would be very difficult to correlate because you won't have enough information. You need to have a single system that allows you to have both in a single entity. So the identity object itself has a core part and a transient part built in. That's fine.
Come up with my other question, because I think my understanding, there are relational databases, they actually able to offer type of NoSQL. Like, was a high database, there's a number of other solutions. Have you looked into those?
I have. I think there are solutions. That's what I'm proposing. You need to look into those. You also have to look at how you do security and governance of the data, because there's aspects of it that may be privacy or consent driven. And there are aspects of that maybe hierarchical where you're managing different objects. So Bjorn mentioned like having a graph type database, overlaying that. But that's kind of the way we think applications will want to query about information. We think analytics will be driven by that type of information as well. Great. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to come up. I'll be at the booth, either here or at the booth in the afternoon. Thank you.